This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And sponsored by Uber Creative Agency, a boutique web design, development, and marketing agency based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with clients across the U.S. We don't just provide services, we deliver value.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, Frida, you set up a chat with someone we've been trying to line up for a little bit. Now we got them.
Yes, absolutely. And 5 great parks on Lake Superior. But one we don't often get a chance to visit, especially for you and I, because we're here in Michigan, but it's in the far northern reaches of Minnesota, and it's at Grand Portage National Monument. And it's exciting to speak with the brand new superintendent there, Heather Boyd. Welcome, Heather.
Yeah, welcome.
Thanks, Frida and Walt, for having me.
Happy to have you here. Let's talk a little bit about it. I mean, you're the new superintendent, Grand Portage National Monument, but what's kind of your story? What was your first how did you get working for the National Park Service?
Well, actually, in about 2008, I started with Isle Royale National Park and Keweenaw National Historical Park as a shared career seasonal administrative support assistant, so it was a subject to furlough position. As positions became open and were vacated, I became the maintenance program budget analyst, and then a few years into that position, I really discovered I had a desire to pursue a position in park management, so I actually returned to college to pursue my bachelor's degree in public administration and community development from Central Michigan University. And then soon after that, getting my diploma, the administrative officer position became available, and I was selected for that. So I was the administrative officer for Isle Royale and Keweenaw National Historical Park for the last 5 years.
Okay, that's quite a...
Well, Heather, are you a Michigander to begin with?
I'm actually a tribal member out of the Red Cliff Reservation in Red Cliff, Wisconsin, and so that's where I grew up.
Okay. So for you now to go from Isle Royale to Grand Portage, and, we had a chance to speak a little bit with Tim Cochran because he shared with us how tightly those 2 parks really are when it comes to their heritage.
Yeah, so Isle Royale National Park and Grand Portage National Monument obviously include the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and they have ancestral and historical connections with the island and, of course, with the Grand Portage local area.
When you were a kid, did you go to these places? Did you go to Isle Royale and go to Grand Portage?
Actually, it wasn't until I started working at Isle Royale National Park that I was able to go visit out to the island.
You mentioned a little bit, though, some of just sort of that overview of your time with the Park Service, but a little bit more on your career path with the parks. I mean, your tenure at other sites, things that you touched on. I mean, there was obviously some work as you were moving up the chain there that you were doing, right?
Yeah, so I worked previously for the federal government in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I worked in realty and tribal operations, so I did have previous federal experience when I applied for the administrative support assistant position with Isle Royale National Park and Keweenaw National Historical Park. So that helped me, get in. And then obviously as I identified where my career path was going, that, kind of drove where I wanted to go back to school. What
a blend of all of your, all of the unique features of your life are kind of all coming together with this position at Grand Portage.
Yeah, it really is it does really appeal and connect with me because as a fellow Anishinaabe person, the history and the story and the location on, Lake Superior, Gitchigami is, part of the ancestral homelands of the Grand Portage people, of the Anishinaabe people. So it's really special that I get to continue to steward the park resources there in Grand Portage in connection and with a co-management agreement with the Grand Portage Band.
So does that carry a special appeal for you? I mean, how does that really, in effect, I guess, for you feel?
So allowing me to be the superintendent at Grand Portage National Monument helps me continue to, preserve and protect and tell the Anishinaabe story, which, obviously has a connection with my heritage and culture as well as, the Grand Portage people in the community.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any plans already in your project folder that you would like to bring to the table?
Yeah, so I think that with my knowledge of Isle Royale and the operations and the, Grand Portage and working with the Grand Portage Band through my employment with Isle Royale and with Keweenaw, I know the operations, so there might be some areas that I could help explore and expand some opportunities to the Grand Portage community and to, the Grand Portage Band.
We're talking with Heather Boyd today on the Lake Superior podcast. She is the superintendent of Grand Portage National Monument. Heather, we have people that listen to this podcast all around the world, and sometimes they're just checking it out to learn something new about these national parks and Lake Superior. Can you tell us, in your words, what sets Grand Portage apart from the other parks?
Definitely. The Grand Portage National Monument is set apart by other park units because it is the first National Park Service site that is co-managed with a tribal nation. Mm-hmm. The site is located actually on donated land in the middle of the Grand Portage Reservation. And actually, we're approaching a pretty historical time. In 2024 will be the celebration of 25 years of successful co-management.
25 years. Okay, so there's a definite history there. Is there anything also that is just that beyond that you would tell somebody that this is worth checking out because it's a little bit different?
Actually, in the story behind Grand Portage and the National Monument is pretty interesting. In 1951, the property was actually designated as the Grand Portage National Historic Site and then opened for visitors. But it wasn't until 1958 that it was designated a national monument. Mm-hmm. The Portage Trail, or the Gitchigami, is also designated as a Minnesota State Historic Site. So that's the 8.5-mile portage that allowed the travelers to bypass the falls and the cascades and the gorges, and has been really a critical transportation route for thousands of years.
Is there a favorite spot in the park that you like to talk about with people? Is there a favorite spot even for yourself to just go to?
To be fair, I guess, I have not had an opportunity to hike to Fort Charlotte just yet. I'm hoping to do that this fall sometime, but my current favorite spot would be on the top of Mount Rose. Mount Rose is a 1.2-mile loop trail that offers panoramic views of Lake Superior and the Grand Portage Bay that are really breathtaking. The trail also provides a kind of an overlook of the historic depot and Mount Josephine.
It had been some time since you'd had the annual rendezvous at Grand Portage because COVID got in there. But I understand this August you were actually able to have that event again. How did it go?
The 2022 rendezvous was really spectacular. It was my first reenactment event, which was really cool. After a 2-year break due to COVID, the return of rendezvous and the Grand Portage community powwow was really healing and reinvigorating is what I hear from the community members. We had 250 registered reenactors and I believe approximately 3,100 visitors through the site on Friday through Saturday. So it really was a success. I think visitors and reenactors and everyone involved was really excited that we could come back together for that event.
Take me through that. What do you do at this as an event? What happens?
So it is weekend reenactment. We have reenactors that come from all over the place, and they, camp and are in reenactment mode through the weekend. We have hosted workshops. We have opening ceremony. It really is a really great celebration.
Well, when you talk about reenactment, what, forgive my naivete, what are you reenacting? Are you sort of setting like what it was back in the past, or is there a moment of something that you are reenacting?
Oh, sure. So the reenactment is related to the fur trading era, back in the 17th and 18th century, which was at the Grand Portage, in the historic depot of the Grand Portage National Monument.
So you've made it through COVID now, and you're moving into serving as the new superintendent. Heather Boyd, by the way, with us on the podcast today with the Grand Portage National Monument. Are there special projects now that you're looking at, maybe something into the future, even into the next year or two, that you can maybe talk about a touch?
Sure. We are looking for ways that we can continue to partner with our local, county, and state partners on projects in the park and in the community. We're looking for ways to expand some youth opportunities, which is really exciting. And actually, I wanted to mention real quick, too, that the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation was actually a partner on this year's Rendezvous event, so we thank you for that.
You are very welcome. And I am putting that on my calendar because, Walt, I love when I can go to a tribal dance event, when there's just the music, the drumming, the costumes, and to listen to the singing, too. I love that chant and all of the things. And you can see a good example of that, I think, on your website, too. Do you have that, Heather, the videos that have been kind of shared with, the world on all the cool things that happen at Rendezvous?
Yeah, so the community does have their local powwow event the same weekend as Rendezvous, and that's probably what you're referring to when you're talking about dancing, and I apologize. But so that starts on Friday and goes through Sunday, and really the two events complement each other, so it really was a special weekend.
Is there anything special that you have planned for the winter months?
I'm just continuing to get to know the operation and the employees, having some additional conversations with, partners on some of the projects that have been identified since I've arrived, some new things I would like to, expand on, kind of a lot of things in the hopper for the winter.
Yeah, and I'm sure the winter is always a factor, too, in terms of how tough it can be. And, of course, where you're at, like us over here, even in the UP of Michigan, it can be tricky. When we're talking about the whole national monument, the Grand Portage National Monument, where can people go to maybe find out some more information? Maybe if they want to find out if they want to make the trip, the journey over to visit the place.
I would highly recommend going to our park website, www.nps.gov/GRPO. The park actually has some really excellent films that they have created on site that has some amazing content about the history and the culture of the fur trade through present, really.
Interesting. And what is the website that people can find that at?
www.nps.gov/GRPO.
Okay. Well, good information there. I'm sure we'll be able to link that up into some information as well. Heather Boyd with us here, who is the new superintendent at Grand Portage National Monument. Just as we're starting to wrap up here, I guess I'm curious, Heather, what are some perhaps of your thoughts, either of the journey that you've been on that's gotten you to Grand Portage, maybe the time with Isle Royale, how it all ties together? What is really important maybe for people that are listening to know about experiencing these places?
It really is a unique opportunity to have worked at Isle Royale and to now work at Grand Portage, to see how the connection that is there for the Anishinaabe people, the Grand Portage people, and to really be able to come and help steward the park resources now has been, just so humbling, and I'm honored.
You know, it's so interesting, Heather. I'm about to take off and circling Lake Superior in my own travel trailer and get out there and visit. But when you look at the circle of what that lake provides for us, for you, so you grew up basically in the Apostle Islands. Is that right?
Yes.
And now spending time at Isle Royale. You've also been, of course, at the Keweenaw, because when you're at Isle Royale, you come back. And did you live in Houghton?
I lived in Chassel, yes.
Well, there you go. And so did Walty Point
that's
there.
actually where I grew up in Chassel, so I know it very well. So it's a smaller world than you would think.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is quite a journey that you've been on. I mean, I always like to ask this, if we can, with our guests about like making this experience and making this journey, because Lake Superior and all of these locations can be daunting for some people, but they seem like they are very rewarding if people take the time to explore them and learn about them. Why would you say that's important?
I do, the ancestral connection that I have in this area has really allowed me to kind of continue to pursue my career in my path, which has been really, really great.
Well, we appreciate you taking a few moments today to talk with us about your new time now as superintendent at the Grand Portage National Monument. Again, if you could give us that website, perhaps, where people could go to find out a little bit more about Grand Portage.
Sure. www.nps.gov/GRPO.
Well, we appreciate your time with us today, Heather. Best of luck as you embark on this journey now as the superintendent at Grand Portage. I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk with you again sometime soon here on the podcast as well, especially if you're going to have another rendezvous days or anything like that into the future.
Thanks again, Frida and Walt. Have a great day.
You too.
It's Heather Boyd, the new superintendent at Grand Portage National Monument. And, Frida, it's real interesting just having the conversation with Heather, because we know she's relatively new in the position, but she's already got all this experience through the Park Service and everything in Isle Royale and the Keweenaw and everything, that it all ties together. And you mentioned connections that really, it seems to be underlying here with her.
I feel like we capitalize that for Heather. You know, when it looks like when you're born for a job, and how her career path, and knowing that she grew up in the Apostles as a member of the Red Cliff Band, and now what she brings to that table in the Grand Portage area. And I know it's got to be huge on the respect level that someone's kind of been there, done that, and knows those cultures and how to really present that. As she said, the 25th anniversary coming up, that's a big deal.
And you mentioned also, that we talk about with the Park Service and the national parks on Lake Superior, that there's obviously the natural beauty component, or the visual stunning quality of visiting these places. But when you can really get to know more about the history, more about the cultures, more about the living history that's happening every day at these parks, it's really great. And it sounds to me like Heather is going to really be making that a continuing priority at Grand Portage National Monument. I do want to remind everybody that if you have an idea, maybe there's something that you'd like to hear us talk about on the podcast, we'd be happy to hear from you. You can find us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation website. And as you see these posted on various social medias, drop some comments there as well.
Absolutely. We're always looking for good stories about the Big Blue out there. And I thought it was very interesting that Heather actually lived in your old hometown there in Chassel.
In Chassel, Michigan. So if you know where that is, you always know there's no hassle when you're from Chassel.
Oh, there you go.
That's going to do it for us. We appreciate you checking out the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And sponsored by Uber Creative Agency, a boutique web design, development, and marketing agency based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with clients across the U.S. We don't just provide services, we deliver value.